Okay, hi guys. We are going to continue with the topic of political economy of development. This is the second lecture, and we're going to have one more, um, one of your additional ones. Um, so this lecture, lecture two, I draw mainly on like three main sources or the readings. You know, the three main readings listed in your syllabus: the role of cronyism in Arab capitalism by Herdog, and the wages of oil by Herb, and again the book chapters from Herdog book. So last lecture we talked about the legacy of the deep state and the heavy intervention of the state in order to undertake this far-reaching distributive programs and import substitution industrialization. And actually this left kind of permanent imprint on the role of the state in economy in the Arab region. But like after the exhaustion or the when some countries like descended into and ran into different difficult economic situations and economic crises, so they had to undertake some stabilization and structural reform measures by liberalizing their economy, and supposedly to allow for more space for the private sector and domestic capitalists in order to initiate or to invest in some sectors or some economic domains. But what happened, it was like the in order actually to make this shift or transition from state-led economy to economic or market reform measures or economic liberalization, the state actually had to reshift the social and economic coalitions towards the capitalist or the private sector. So like to move away from like trade unions and popular classes, that they offered some support or legitimate social basis for import substitution industrialization in order to attract private sector and to get them connected and to guarantee their loyalty to the political regime, in order like they were motivated by kind of political reasons or purposes how to undertake these measures, these kind of economic measures, without losing control over power or over society, and shifting these kind of social and economic coalitions without disturbing the social contract with the citizens. So what happened by like reaching out or approaching capitalist and the capitalist class, so the state actually in the Arab region created this kind of insider and outsider structure by like getting connected with particular or selective firms or business community while excluding others. And these the well-connected communities or firms, actually they enjoyed some they got like some benefits or preferential treatment out of this like connection with the ruling elites, and they usually they were like connected with the ruling parties as the NDP in Egypt and Ben Ali family in Tunisia, and the royal family and the king in Morocco. So actually, that was like hence the conception of crony capitalism and informality that actually permeated or prevailed the economic transactions or the economic activities in the Arab region after the enactment of economic liberalization measures. So the main purpose was to empower, not only like to empower connected or the loyal firms, but also to close off, or to exclude entirely the outsiders that the actually they represent kind of a threat to the existing ruling class, or well connected, with the opposition, and most especially like some Islamic firms, that they were like connected with the Islamic opposition, for example, in Egypt. Um, so like in Egypt, like well-connected, firms like related to the NDP or the ruling party, especially after when when Gamal Mubarak actually entered the political scene and tried to push for some political and economic reforms. So like this gave rise to some capitalists that played important political role during like since 2004 until the outbreak of the uprising. So the most famous one was like the steel magnate Ahmed Az, and like in Tunisia, like the bin Ali family actually dominated, the economic, almost like considerable percentage of the economic activities. In Syria, the Rami Makhlouf, the Al Assad's cousin, actually monopolized, some sectors like telecommunications sector. And in Morocco, like the royal families and its like um, political allies or political entourage, they enjoyed, some sort of preferential treatment and access to some resources that actually other friends, were denied to get access to. And this kind of treatment actually concentrated mainly in some sectors like banking and tourism and telecommunication or natural resources. In Egypt, for example, the expansion of tourism in Sinai, it gave like some sort of privileges and treatment, special treatment to some connected or well-connected firms to by getting access to lands or giving kind of government license and credit in order to establish their kind of construction in these touristic areas. And Egypt, like according to the literature, it was like one of the highest exposure to cronyism or like the high level of crony capitalism during that period. Or like they might get like not only like license in order to establish their own in order to allow their own business to make their own business operate or to establish their own business, but also they might get like state subsidies. So again, like in Egypt, like energy intensive sectors, actually they used to receive subsidized energy from the state. And these sectors, they didn't have like kind of ability to generate or to create job opportunities in order to deal with the high unemployment rate. So like some other like treatment to or like privileges or benefits that the state would give to politically connected PCFs, like politically connected firms, like some sort of facilities or like easy regulations in order to get some sort of entry to lucrative economic sectors, especially in tourism and real estate. Um, and with these kind of regulations, the state also or the regime might actually put some barriers in order to prevent outsiders from entering these sectors. So it was like kind of selective enforcement of regulation as well, facilitating some regulations to politically connected firms and increasing the barriers for the outsiders. And in some sectors like banking or like telecommunications, they needed usually in several countries they do need like licenses and government authorization. So like the government or the regime has like the final say in order to give these kind of licenses or to authorize particular enterprises and to prevent others from getting established. Um, like access to credit as well. It was like one of the mechanisms, or one of the like the areas or the policy areas the regime would invest in order to reward the politically connected firms by giving kind of preferential access to credit to connected firms with the public banks or the private banks, or to protect them from international or global competition, especially in like trade sectors. So by selectively applying, this kind of trade policies, by increasing or raising, the tariff barriers to protect, politically connected firms, and to shield them from international competition. So this kind of selective enforcement of regulation, and like putting kind of imposing tariff barriers in order to shield them from competition, it was like kind of benefits these politically connected firms, might get by approaching or connecting with the ruling family or the ruling elites, or like, getting kind of uh, procurement contracts, like politically connected firms, like in Turkey, for example, like these, like, the enterprises that um, had some sort of connection or associated with the AKP, like or like mainly like religious business network, that they are associated with the AKP, they might get, this kind of contracts in order to facilitate their business. And this actually led to like a distrust of the private sector, and with kind of no incentive at all in order to like to increase productivity or to improve on kind of skills in order to get, some sort of expert orientation, and this would feed back into economic growth and um, generating, some sort of job opportunities. So you have like Tunisia was like, Egypt like had the highest, exposure to cronyism, and Tunisia as well, with the like bin Ali family that actually captured, the or created, this kind of the legal framework or the environment within which, these kind of firms, operated. So it was like, like an example of a state capture by like using, this kind of investment laws or legislation or incentive code in order to restrict entry into some sectors, and to authorize permission, or to authorize or to offer permission to certain enterprises, or like, loyal firms, in order to run their own business, and to put more restrictions on particular, investment or foreign investment in particular sectors or areas. So, and these kind of regulations, were vulnerable to abuse, or to be like selectively imposed or enforced. So, in order to create, this kind of to steer, like, the foreign funds to the loyal or preferred or connected, partners, or business community or business group, and to create, the environment, or to play with, or to manufacture this kind of market power as well. So the state, or bin Ali, like bin Ali regime and bin Ali family, actually controlled, the environment, and actually they got control over a considerable percentage of all the economic activities, in especially in non-tradable sectors. And this, like, certainly like lead to like deep division between like different market players. Like it had like kind of implication for labor market, and for like private sector as well. So with the private sector, there is kind of a division between this kind of insider and outsider, as we're going to see shortly. like politically connected, and the outsider, the excluded, firms. And this led to more kind of social exclusion and inequality, because the private sector actually failed to generate, or like it didn't have any plan to help with, like, generating, or improving on the employment skills, or creating, more job opportunities. So in order to have kind of a share, or to contribute to some sort of solution to deep-seated economic problems. So that this is mainly from Herdog chapter. He tried to apply, like, the varieties of capitalism. The concept actually was coined in order to examine the interaction between different domains of capitalist economies in the Western countries, between basically the firms or the private sector and the labor market and financial markets, and withdrawing, or applying the concept to the Arab economies in order to investigate how the interaction between these spheres that actually underline, the transaction between, like, the core market players, or the market, sectors or domains. It actually, in the Arab economies, it took kind of market and non-market forms of interaction and coordination. And these types of interaction between, like, these like three spheres, they actually complement each other, and they are kind of they reinforce, some sort of negative equilibrium, as we're going to see shortly. So the starting point is the legacy of the state role, or the state intervention in the region, that created, this economic dualism between insider and outsider. And that was like it's not only in it's not applicable to politically connected firms only, but also, like, to labor market. It led to a kind of division, or, like, quote unquote segmentation of labor market as well. So for the private sector, because of this crony capitalism, this created, kind of privileges the insiders actually enjoyed, by this kind of different preferential treatment, by access to some credit and resources and subsidies, or, like, offering, tariff trade barriers. For public employment as well, like, they had, like, politically, like, insiders, they are kind of politically much more important than informal like informal sector or private sector. They enjoyed some sort of protection, or like social security measure, or some sort of welfare coverage. But, like, the outsiders, or the informal sector, or the private sector, they didn't have this kind of social security, or any kind of social welfare coverage at all. So, like, the argument here is, as he mentioned, actually it's not like a causal mechanism, it's kind of a descriptive pattern. But here it's the underlying logic here is, it does exist, this kind of crony capitalism or cronyism, and this kind of division of the labor market. They do exist, in different economies. But what made, like, the Arab economies so special with this regard, that these kind of problems are rigid and much stickier in the Arab economies, and it's very difficult to overcome. Because of what? Because, the structure, this kind of a structure, it offered kind of a stable equilibrium, by creating, vested interest to defend the status quo. So it's not only in different players within the system, like the insider, the politically connected firms, they needed to preserve, they resist actually any kind of a change, in order to protect, their privileges, or to maintain, this kind of preferential treatment, and for like public employment as well, like the formal um, labor market, or the formal sector, in for public employment. So it created like active player that actually defend the status quo and resist any kind of any kind of a change. And it created as well like distorted development, because like they got like for private firms, they got these kind of preferential treatment or privileges anyway, so they didn't have any incentive to increase this kind of increase their productivity in order to contribute to the economic growth. And as well, like the nepotism and this kind of meritocratic deficit, like the state, like the insider, the as like public employment, they didn't have any incentive to improve on existing skills, or even like like outsiders, like informal and informal sectors, because like it has to do, like it has nothing to do with like skill, the level, or the skills, or the level of education, and more to do with this kind of political connection and nepotism. And this actually they both actually reinforce each other, and they lead to this kind of distorted development, this low skills and low productivity. And here is like the graph to show this kind of relationship between the interaction between these spheres. So you have like the interventionist state, like the legacy of like the like planned economy, and the very existence or presence of the state in the economic domain. And then you have divided or segmented private sector and segmented labor market as well. So on your right hand side here, so you have like the private sector, like only like the insiders, or the politically connected firms or communities. They actually they make some demands, and they would affect the policy making process. And the state, not only the state actually intervenes by over regulating their business or their enterprises, and to protect them they offered kind of protection, and some sort of offering some, or facilitating some sort of privileges. And not only like protecting, but also like excluding uh, outsiders, or like that they would represent potential threat. And for labor market, so they barely make like labor forces, they barely make any demands for like significant reform. They didn't make any kind of significant reform demands, because like the insiders, or politically important ones or relevant ones, they enjoyed some sort of social protection, and the state actually offered some public jobs. It's inherited from this perception that the state had to offer to deliver on like promises of complete employment of all university graduates. So actually it's still like after the enactment of economic reform measures, it was not like it was not the same, like at least in Egypt and some other republics, but still like resonated with the Gulf economies, with like a huge public sector employment. And here, like the interaction between the private sector and the labor market. So the private sector, they didn't have any kind of incentives in order to acquire kind of new skills. And by the same token, like the labor market as well, the offer, the supply, the only thing the offer was like, or it's still like limited skilled supply. So how this way, they might, reinforce each other, and this leads to kind of a stable equilibrium that affected negatively the development or the growth rate, and the trust and the coordination level. So here, like, you have like truncated lines, and it's way too unconnected between the segmented private sector and segmented labor market. So the actually didn't have any sort of like what's called like negotiation, or yeah, it's kind of it's called the kind of class compromise that actually underpin, any sort of capitalist economy. So so here, like, they didn't have the logic here is like the private sector seeks mainly like profit maximization, and this, like, profits that they will kind of accumulate, they will kind of invest in the future in order to, and this kind of investment would create more kind of job opportunities or employment, and this kind of employment would lead to like increasing, the tax revenues for the state in order to finance, the public service, or to offer, some sort of public goods. So this kind of interaction, or the negotiation, or the compromise between the two classes, the the structure of this dualistic structure, or this segmentation within, like, the private sector or within the labor market, it actually prevented this from happening. And like logically, this actually like feeds back into, the dominant position of the state in controlling, these kind of interactions, and perpetuating, the same logic, or the same pattern of interaction. So out of these are not like, they are not kind of mechanisms, but some sort of like the pattern of interaction between how, like, this kind of interaction between, like, the private sector and the labor market, and with the existence or the domineering role of the state actually self-reinforcing, and reproduce, the same pattern, like the same pattern of development, or distorted uh, development policies over time. So like for public employment and subsidies, so these people actually, they didn't have any kind of incentive to improve on the skills, because these kind of acquiring new skills are like some sort of limited or no relevance whatsoever, giving, this level of corruption, or informality, and nepotism. So they actually depended on the state, or, like, what's called wasta, in order to get, this public employment status, without, bothering to improve on their skills. And then the government intervention in the private sector, this kind of continuing interventionist role of the state, but like now not to plan the economy, but to protect, the to overregulate, the insiders, and to protect them, and to increase the barriers for outsiders, to prevent them from gaining, any kind of autonomous position, or accumulating kind of power bases that would threaten like the existing political regime in the future. Segmented, labor market, as I mentioned, there was, like, kind of division between formal formal sector, or an informal sector, and private sectors. And like, again, like, they lack, any kind of incentives to seek education, or to improve on the skills, because the most important thing is to get connected with the wasta, or to have like, kind of connection, or within like the power centers, in order to gain like, a position. Um, so like, and with getting, this kind of insider status, the like um, the formal labor market actually, or the getting, a like connected with the state, or the ruling elites, so they might get like social security insurance, and some sort of welfare coverage, that made them like, politically important and relevant, comparing to the outsiders, and they will be like, happy and comfortable with the status quo, without, any potential to resist the state or the regime, in order to maintain their privileges, or to privilege the to maintain, their benefits and privileges gained from the state or from the existing regime. Because of the legacy of import substitution, industrialization, and authoritarianism, so they created like the post-colonial leaders, or like, the political regimes, especially like, the military regimes, and in the Gulf, as we are going to see, they have like some sort of weak interest representations. Um, so they didn't have like some sort of horizontal organizations that would arrange or coordinate some sort of collective action between social forces, except for the trade union in Tunisia, as we are as actually as we mentioned when we talked about the state building in Tunisia, because it played pivotal role in the struggle against colonialism. So it became like, integral part of the new Destor party. So apart from that, the trade unions, they didn't have any kind of leverage, or like powerful position, like bargaining position, in order to make, any kind of to negotiate, or to have like, collective bargaining position in relation to the existing regime. So it was like, kind of unorganized, informal, like, in addition to like the weak interest representation inherited from the legacy of the import substitution industrialization, informal sector as well, the lacks any kind of organizational structure that would pressure or to improve the negotiable position of this sector in relation to the state or the political regime. And like this segmented business sector as well, it's you have well-connected or politically connected firms, and the outsider firms. It's not only like the even like politically connected. It doesn't mean like, the so again, like, not only like in order to get like, connected with the like political class or the ruling elites, not only to protect your business or your enterprises, but also to help, with some sort issuing some regulations in order to increase barriers for outsiders as well. And this would benefit or strengthen the position of the politically connected firms in relation to the outsiders. So they would get, some sort of benefits and privileges that they didn't get, if things, left to the market imperatives, for example. And all these actually feed into this another equilibrium of low cooperation and low trust between different market players. So like they don't trust each other, like the private sector and the labor, for example, and this undermine any sort of cooperation or coordination between different institutions or different players, in order to offer some sort of policy solutions to or to offer diagnosis and to offer solutions to the existing economic problems that would help with that would help to increase, the growth level or the growth rate and the investment policies. So like these kind of resilient or rigid, corruption and nepotism, uh, they actually reinforce this pattern of interaction in order to reproduce the same outcome of distorted, development policies. And that was called like political complementarity. So there is kind of mutual interest between the state and the private firms, the connected ones, and the crony capitalists, in order to protect themselves and to increase the barriers of the barriers for um, to keep, this discriminatory policies that would protect them and that actually protect them and exclude the outsiders or non-connected private firms. And for the labor market, this exclusion actually the like insiders and politically like relevant groups, actually they are comfortable with the status quo, so that's why they are happy with the exclusion or um, of like some informal the exclusion of informal sectors in order to maintain their like protection and welfare coverage. So and this actually would like reinforce each other and prevent any kind of transformation or radical kind of transformation of the economy in order again to increase the growth rate or to to depoliticize, the economic policy making. Yeah. So that was like we have talked about the role of the state and the import substitution, industrialization, and redistributive policies, and then the legacy of this interventionist or heavy interventionist role of the state in the economies. But basically, we talked about the republics. Now we need to shift the focus in order to investigate, the how things, operate, or what kind of economic activities look like in the Gulf states. So they are kind of the dominant analytical framework for the Gulf economies is what's called in the literature rentier state. Um, so the main assumptions are like by relying mainly on oil or natural resources or the rent. So this would give the state high degree of autonomy from the society, and this actually led to the fragmentation of like different social forces and undermine the high degree or high level of independence of the state from society. This subsequently undermines the autonomy of different social forces. And because of these economies, they don't rely on taxes. There is no kind of taxation at all. So this would weaken the regulatory capacity of the state, because like imposing taxation, they need some sort of bureaucratic or administrative capacity building in order to get access to improve on the extractive power of the state. And subsequently relying on the rents, this would like the lead eventually to like high level of rent seeking and corruption that would like affect the economy or the development policies negatively. So the readings, I assigned mainly to for this week um, they do agree on the important role of the oil, and the actually the main assumptions, of the rentier state, actually they offer some sort of information about how, like, on the political economy of the Gulf, or some sort of, like, political economy of the authoritarianism, or the how actually rents affected the development strategy, or the policy choices, or the policy options. But the actually added or mixed the this variable, the rents, or the existence or the presence, of the oil or the natural resources, with other variables. So in the case of, like, Herdog, he mentioned something about a history of state building, and how bringing historical institutionalism and path dependency would help capture the complexity of the policy choices, or the decision, or the policy making in the basically in Saudi Arabia. So, like, oil does matter, but how it matters, it's kind of the mechanisms, about how oil actually affects, like, the power structures or the labor market in the case of her, or this kind of policy making process and power structure. It's kind of highly contested. So like, the literature agrees on the importance, or the relevance of the oil, but the disagreement over the mechanisms, how actually this affects, how oil affects certain outcomes, like endurance of authoritarianism, distorted development policies, or fragmented labor market. So the main thing, how to it was like kind of interaction between the oil and other variables that actually would account for specific outcomes. So in the case of Saudi Arabia, if you remember when we talked about, the state building in week 6, and we draw mainly on All in the Family book by her, it was kind of how the oil actually reinforced or offered some sort of diversification, or widened, the institutional options to the ruling families, in order to dole out, some or to expand, the patronage structure, or the nepotistic structure, in order to stabilize their rules. So how oil and history interacted to produce a specific institutional setting, or institutional setup, and how affected, the power structure and labor market over time, was, like, the crux of the analysis of the literature we focus on. So here, like, the underlying point, or the underlying logic, is, like, this kind of outcomes, any outcomes, we need to investigate, like, development trajectory, or like regime type, economic policy making. These kind of outcomes are not, like, predetermined, and in order to capture, these kind of complexity, the we need to look into, different variables, and how these variables interacted over time with the oil, or with the rents, in these economies. So here, like, for Saudi Arabia, the main argument here, how to disintegrate, or to not to deal, with the state and society as kind of a coherent whole, how to, what Herdog mentioned, to unpack, the state. So like, a quick reminder about, the state building in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia didn't have any sort of class alliance with the, like, tribes or merchants, or even, as I mentioned, ulama. but they had to, like, ruling family or Al Saud, they had to co-opt or to distribute, some sort of material benefits in order to co-opt, the citizens into acquiescence, and to distribute some administrative positions in the state bureaucracies or administrative apparatus in order to maintain or to foster their position or their power. Um, so here, like, in Saudi Arabia, it was like highly personalized, kind of from the very beginning. So they had, like, Al Saud created, this kind of administrative and bureaucratic structures that was kind of highly personalized, and they put them under, the control of directly of Al Saud by creating, this vertical power structures. Um, and this historical legacy carried over or like persisted into or extended into or extended over time, that reproduced, itself, and it made it very difficult for Al Saud family to turn on the organization or institutional options they took in the early stages. So this created what he called kind of specific, fiefdoms, or like ministers actually turned into, this kind of fiefdoms, or segmented, structure, or segmented organizational structure. And this actually has something to do with the economic policy making, especially like when you make like economic choices. This kind of segmented structure affected the policy choice or the policy options. So focusing, like shifting the focus away from this macro level of analysis, like by disaggregating, this, or deconstructing the conception of the state into, or to break it down into like specific elements, by focusing on specific institutions and organizational structure. So you focus on the meso level or the micro level of analysis. So in order to shift the focus from like the state apparatus, by focusing on how different institutions or organizations differed in their coordinating, capabilities or capacity, and to integrate kind of policies between different institutions and different organizations. And this capacity is significantly low because like the lack of any kind of horizontal cooperation between these organizations. And then like getting even to the lower level by focusing on the micro level actors or the behavior of the individuals in these organizations. This would cast a light on some sort of individual behavior, and to what extent, this would preclude the implementation of certain economic policies. So the central point here, that Saudi Arabia undertook kind of reform measures in the 90s, but it had like, kind of varied records. It successfully managed to proceed, with some reforms in some areas, where these areas like involved few organizational players, so they didn't need any kind of coordination or interaction between different organizational players, or different to get through different, powerful organizational structure with different obstacles. And in some other areas, the some reforms actually the regime or the state didn't manage to implement successfully some sort of reforms. In order to examine, this variation of the varied records, of economic policy making and the implementation of these reforms. So we have to unpack the state and to focus on this meso level of fragmentation, what he called like the width of the of this level, the organizational the interaction between different organizations and networks, and the depth of the reforms in order to look into the implementation or the individual behavior. So this would offer more instead of focusing on like state autonomy, so we need to disintegrate or to break down the state capacity as well, in order to investigate this varied record and to put them into its historical context. And the central point here is what he called segmented clientelism. So politics within the state. So the according to Rentier state, so the state enjoyed level of autonomy in relation to social forces. That's true, but there had been kind of politics within the state by disaggregating or unpacking this state apparatus by focusing on on different layers below this macro level of analysis. So segmented capitalism, clientelism. It's clientelism. It entails or involves this kind of unequal and exclusive relationship between two parties, and it entails kind of power structures as well, and it's relatively stable relationship for of exchange between you have to offer something in order to get something in return. So it's kind of a vertical structure or links that actually dominated by Al Saud at the top. But getting into this meso or micro level of analysis with the state, this we can look into different behavior and different different levels that actually, or to disentangle different factors that would prevent any sort of policy coordination. And it's segmented because it's kind of a parallel or a separate existence or presence of distributive system or structural organizational structure that would be balanced by the existence of small scale or cross-cutting small scale networks within these kind of meso and micro level of analysis. So the state-society relation, if we focus on the macro level, it's kind of a dominant or a domineering role of Al Saud, and that's heavy-hand strategy that actually dominated this vertical clientelistic structure, redistributive system or redistributive structure. But by focusing, on the meso level or the micro level of analysis, we can disentangle different forms of state-society relation, and we can detect some sort of veto players and parallel and separate institutional structure that prevented, the implementation or precluded the implementation of some policy, some economic policies. And it had, something to do with the historical institutionalism by the decision taking, at a particular time, and then it had sequential impact or ramification for the entire system. And it would be very difficult for Al Saud to turn on, the decision taken, at this earlier period in order to undertake any kind of economic or organizational and institutional reforms. So it was kind of a organizational pattern that had been logged in with this kind of with no powerful collective organizational actors, but with this kind of segmented structure or fragmented structure that created some sort of like I'm not sure, like it's not resistance, but some sort of veto actors that would prevent the implementation of these of some economic policies. So the system is like the entire system is based on this rents and and distribution. So the state actually got some sort of reach and penetration into the society through like this provision of some sort of services like education and health services. And the main providers are like the institutions or certain organizations or bureaucratic apparatuses. Uh, so these kind of some sort of organizations created they enjoyed some degree of autonomy. So they became kind of a state within the Saudi state. And he actually pointed out, or he referred to the some ministers like the defense and interior and religious bureaucracy and national guard with some sort of efficient bureaucratic apparatuses like Aramco and the central bank. They managed to historically, actually the family or the ruling family managed to create these kind of insulated islands of efficiency. And it actually persisted over time. But again, like this kind of clientelistic structure, to what extent, what made it kind of different, or what made like Saudi Arabia kind of a different case if we compare it to Egypt, for example. So again, like Saudi, with this kind of a strong vertical or hierarchical structure, it didn't have any kind of countervailing social forces that would integrate kind of politics or exert some pressures on the political regime. So in some other countries, like in Egypt, like trade unions, are weak, and some sort of collective organizations, they did exist, but they didn't have the capacity or the power to influence the regime. But for Saudi Arabia, it's highly like it's kind of it had no like ruling party and no kind of institutional setting like a parliament or shura councils or like interest groups or organizations, or except for business community, as we're gonna see. But it lagged this kind of collective force or social forces with this horizontal tide that would pressure the system. So like in Latin America, they had the same like extensive clientelistic structure, but in Latin America, the reach of the state and the resources available at the disposal of the state, they were kind of limited, and the reach actually was limited of the state. And in Latin America, it was kind of mediated by some like local bosses or caudillos. So in Saudi Arabia, it's kind of highly like vertical and strictly like vertical structure with no kind of social or collective organizations whatsoever. So no powerful like collective organizations whatsoever. So it was like it's kind of a dominant or a domineering role of the Saudi state, but still like fragmented in itself. So I'm not sure if you studied this in your comparative politics course, but like for historical institutionalism, it's kind of a decision taken at this point in time, and then it would be very difficult. You keep investing in the same decision, like creating kind of institutional setup or institutional configuration, and this like would be very difficult. This kind of organizational constellation would be very difficult to transform or to go back in order to transform this, because it created these kind of sense of entitlement between different groups that they benefited from this distributional system and service and the system of service provision. So the static view of the rentier state, it didn't help with investigating, this sort of how decisions taken, at the very, earlier moment, I mean, at the very earlier time, it would be very difficult for Al Saud. They didn't enjoy, this kind of leeway in order to transform or to turn on this decision. Actually, they kept, like, when they failed in reorganizing or restructuring some institutions or organizations, they created, kind of parallel bodies with different jurisdiction in order to implement or to plan certain economic policies. So they created, some sort of entitlement, and some sort of groups benefited from the distributional system, and the society actually still dependent on the state, but the society grew kind of much more independent to play politics within the system or within the state. So it would be very difficult for Al Saud to turn on its commitment, for this distributional system. So, like, so here, like, so this kind of sticky entitlement and this increased the past dependency of early decisions. As I mentioned, it would be very difficult. It was like very difficult for Al Saud to restructure certain ministers or organizations, and some vested interest actually preclude within work, or, like, from within these ministers or institutions, like, it became very difficult to implement, the economic policies or the orders actually taken by Al Saud family. So the point, to what extent this actually differs from the corruption, or the mechanisms actually differ from the corruption and the rent-seeking behavior, like, from within, these organizations or institutional and these institutions and networks, they didn't have, like, the bureaucrats, they didn't have any sort of incentives to activate their role. So they benefited anyway from the patronage structure, and they had their own, position, and they made, some profits from this patronage, and they distribute, some benefits as well to their clients. So they didn't have any sort of incentives to make, like, effective decisions. So there is no kind of delegation of power from the higher authority, but they themselves, they delegate, or they refer, some sort of different, even trivial matters to the higher level of authority. So even, like, the ministers actually, they decided on very trivial manners. The bureaucrats, they didn't take, or they didn't have, they were not willing to decide on. So they lack, this highly centralized structure, and the lack of communication between different organizations and networks. It actually led to, like, kind of inefficient governance, and it actually lead to kind of redundant efforts. Like, the things, had to to get done perhaps like twice or three times, and this increased the transaction cost. And so they had like kind of little capacity, and they were reluctant to take some decisions, and this led to kind of distrust between the bureaucratic structure and here, like in our case, we do care about business community, and they were like reluctant to disclose the information to the state as well. um, so like they had like it's not like the lack of taxation that undermined the regulatory capacity of the state. It had like or it has like well endowed the large bureaucratic structure, but and it penetrated the different like different spheres in the society, and like it had strong presence in people's lives through this distributional system. But it had like limited capacity to gather information or to influence individual behaviors in certain institutions and organizations. um, so this actually the lack of information and the very existence of informal small scale like networks within different institutions, um, this actually pushed business community or like different people to get things done through kinship ties or friendship links in order to get around some the law enforcement or some regulations. So below the level of the technocrats or the ministers, there are kind of brokers that actually they give people access. They give people access to the bureaucratic or the institutional structure that they didn't have. They didn't have access to. So the some like the kind of they're kind of well connected or well networked people, and from like perhaps like middle class or low class, in order to facilitate some even paperwork for them. And this is how like things in order to get things done through intermediaries or in Arabic like the wast as well. So it's not only like nepotism and corruption, because like some of the bureaucrats actually they had this high level of education, as I mentioned in week 6, and they actually committed to producing certain like outcomes. But the organizational structure of the state at this on this meso level, this led to or lead the incoherent or fragmented the organizational structures lead to this incoherent policies and fragmented jurisdiction between different organizations and different and the creation of this parallel institutional settings. So like with the very existence of this segmented structure, organizational structure, fragmented or fiefdoms on this level, and the lower level as well with different veto actors or veto players below like the technocratic elites, perhaps like administrators or brokers, as I mentioned. So they might like they might actually they might preclude the implementation of the policies, because like it's still like highly centralized structure, and Al Saud the family actually in charge of giving orders and instructions, but the implementation task has to go into some details, not in very like generic or general terms. So they have to go into some details. So that's why some individual behaviors within certain ministers like commerce and labor, for example, they precluded the implementation of certain decisions or certain policies, and this affected the development or the implementation of the economic policies. So in order to get over this, so the state had to create like new like institutional setting with the like to reassign this kind of jurisdiction, or in some policy areas, it needed kind of international or external pressures in order to get, the policy implemented or to get things done. But these are like in a very in the very like rare occasions, happened. But the pattern is like the very existence of this fragmented organizational structure that led to incoherence or the incoherent economic policies. So the only actor that actually enjoyed some degree of organizational capacity are like business communities. So they had their own. They were allowed. They have been allowed, to have like chambers of commerce and industry in order to articulate, their demands, and perhaps, they had like kind of some sort of organizational capacity to pressure the ruling family or the regime. But again, like, they operate, within like the fragmented system, and they themselves, they are linked to some clientelistic network, but not necessarily, this distributional system or distributional networks. But they had like, kind of a connection with they got like, they embed themselves into this patronage structure to get, some benefits. So, and they didn't have any kind of trust with the bureaucratic apparatus. So they had to develop, their own personal connections. So they still operate, from within, this vertical hierarchical structure, and this paternalistic and like is strictly like hierarchical power structures in Saudi Arabia. So they lack, any kind of initiative power in order to influence major policy area or to influence decision-making process. But they can veto, some sort of some policy choices or some economic policies, but they didn't have the capacity or the initiative capacity to initiate or to proactively, like, to have like, policy inputs within, this highly centralized structure that undermine any initiative capacity. So like disaggregating, or unpacking, the state would allow, instead of like, making, this simplistic, relationship between the rentier state and the particular outcomes. Here, like, it doesn't go well, like, the lack of taxation and the regulatory power of the state. The state actually had or enjoyed, some sort of regulatory power, but the very like looking into, the meso level or the micro level of analysis, this would like offer or increase the explanatory leverage. And like, again, like they lacked, this sort of collective collective actors, and the state actually had like the dominant or enjoyed some sort of independence from society, and the society is like fragmented. They lacked, any organizational capacity. But some players, they play politics within the state, and like refining, this kind of refining the theory or the mechanisms of the rentier state would bring the context and the history back into the analysis in order to investigate or to bear on the incoherence of economic policies or different or varied records of policy implementation or economic reform measures implemented in Saudi Arabia. So next time I'll go into Herb argument about he offered another mechanisms that link oil to like the distorted labor market, and he mentioned something about political participation and economic diversification. And then I'll bring, different threads together, like, how to what extent, this affects, the development trajectory and regime, the relationship between development and regime type, and rentier state, and its impact on development choices or development trajectories. Okay, bye.